What is up, guys? It's Coach Ryan Hopkins from Soho Strength Lab in New York City. We are back with a little bit of training content for you. We took a very long break to get our gym straightened away post-COVID. So now that the gym is back and doing its thing, we want to get back on here and just start talking about stuff and, get back to making some good stuff for coaches and athletes alike. So. Anywho, what I wanted to talk about today, guys, is a really important concept that it's actually made a big difference in the results of athletes and training clients together. So I want to kind of present it with both, because I think when we have these conversations, we always separate like clients from like normal training clients from athletes. But I think it's also like very important to talk about the things that we manage for each. Are the same because really why we're managing them that way is the same. So what I wanted to talk about was relative intensity versus absolute intensity, and just frame it a little bit in terms of like, what I'm talking about. So when we look at strength training specifically, we have like charts that tell us, hey, look, at this weight, we should be able to do this many repetitions per set, and we should do about this many repetitions per training session. So it's not a bad thing if you're trying to actually like calculate your training load and stay within the parameters of what's reasonable, that you would do this. There's a number of things you could say about like, the people that that they use to gather this information, that it may not be applicable to most people. I won't get into that, but what we should talk about is like, all right, look, why do people come to train with us? So if we have an athlete, they come to us to get better at sports. If we have a client that is just a personal training client, generally it's to perform better in life or to look better, but something outside of the gym that they want to improve. And it could be just like health. We know that both populations are coming in with extra stress that comes into their stress bucket. So our athletes obviously have the stress of sports, so they're going to practice, they're going to play, they're going to do all kinds of stuff that is going to add to their physical stress bucket. And then they have their whole life, right? So then they have all their lifestyle notes and everything that goes into that. So not a less than complex situation you can see where like stress could pile up even like totally outside of training or sports or whatever. And then you have clients who also have equally complicated lives with work and family and everything else personally that also lends itself to a high stress scenario. The last big thing is like, how are they alike? Is we like, no one comes into the gym to get hurt. So no one comes into the gym and is like, hey man, I want to push this shit to the limit, and if I break, I break. Like maybe they say that. I've had a couple crazies come in and say like, I just want to die. They're cool. But this is generally, our rule is always do no harm. So we can't hurt the athletes because then they can't play sports. And if they get hurt in the gym training for their sport, well then we definitely didn't do a good job. And if it's a training client that comes in and they want to perform better in life in some way, or they're looking to just be healthy, well, injury is like no part of that. Right, so we can see like all these ways that training for an athletic population and then training for a personal training population is very, very, very similar because of all the other constraints that we're going to operate under. So why did I frame it all like that? When we strength train, we have these charts that tell us this is how hard to push someone. So that's the intensity, right? Generally, when we're talking about strength training, load, like how much weight they lift, is what's going to drive the training stimulus, what's going to drive that training effect. There's also a threshold that you do need to push to elicit, to get like the physical change, the physiological change that you want. So for us, if it's strength, well, you have to push pretty hard at a pretty high intensity to get an applicable stimulus, right? So we do need to push the intensity button. Where we can get in trouble is pushing the volume of that at the same time. So when you look at the ranges of like, okay, look at 90%, it's 1 to 4 repetitions. If you've trained for a long time, 90% for 4 repetitions is a heck of an ask, right? If you do a single at 90%, well, that's probably going to be a pretty good single. It's going to be heavy. It's not going to move super fast, but you could probably blast it for a good rep or two. So what I choose to do is I say, hey, look, if I have to train at 90%, because that's where I'm at, and I'm trying to work on the top end of my strength, so like, getting close to absolute strength, or right at it, then I have to do it. But I'm not going to go and I'm not going to push at the top of that repetition range. So I might do some coach might do a 1x4 and I might do a 4x1 or a 2x2, something like that, where I'm still getting the volume, but I'm managing the intensity of either the entire workout by keeping it very small dose, right? I could also just go a 2x1 at 90%, and that would be totally fine, because I'm not hitting the top of what they can do absolutely. So my relative intensity is down, even though my absolute intensity values are pretty high. Let's talk about why we would try to why we might prefer that for each population. So for a sport population or an athletic population, when you go and you work really, really heavy, it's going to take longer time per lift. In sports, you operate with a very short time window. If you look at hey, how long is someone's foot on the ground when they run or when they change directions in sports or something like that, where we see generally high forces experienced by the body. It's between 80 milliseconds and 250 milliseconds, maybe a little north. So it's really it's a pretty short period of time, right? If it's less than 1/10 of a second, it's pretty short. So you don't have that much time to get up to your, any super significant percentage of your maximum voluntary force, right? So we'd say if you can keep the force production window to somewhere that's a little bit faster than that, you're going to see a pretty good carryover. So research shows that basically between 72 to 85 or 87%, even 89% is where we see the best gains for an athletic population. And you think about that, you're why would that be? It's okay, what is more important for that athlete? To be as brutally strong as possible, or to be very explosive and to be able to produce a very high or adequate amount of force in a really short period of time? It's probably going to be the latter, right? If you are moving 72%, you're probably moving that thing just under a meter per second, or maybe 0.8 meters per second. It's pretty quick, right? You're still going to produce a lot of power. If you're looking at power output, which is most important for most athletes in most sports, power is most affected by velocity. So you can have the same load, but if you can move it much, much faster, it's going to be much more powerful. When you're working on force development, which, we're talking about strength right now, so that is kind of what we're talking about, the load is the most important, but you have to look at that time window. So velocity is not as important as the load, but if we're working up close to 90%, we're still getting relevant training, okay? And it's closer to where we might use it. Why might we not do that with personal training population? A lot of times to get the most out of that really high intensity training or doing, very high intensity, absolutely, you have to have some kind of training history where your body can tolerate it. A lot of times when we get personal training clients, they don't have a significant training history. So we are in this stage of we're really trying to develop the muscle and the connective tissues and all those things. And yeah, we're going to do some stuff where it's neurologically intensive. We're not going to omit strength training totally, but we're going to be in more of a structural adaptation phase where time under tensions are really important. Stuff like that. We're not doing a lot of super explosive power work. Maybe we do a little bit, but it's not necessarily our main focus. We're just kind of preparing them for later stages of development. It's really important with personal training clients and athletes alike that you leave yourself somewhere to go over the long term. This is why long-term athletic development is so important, is because you need to start at the beginning and really develop that person totally and fully so that you can continue to train them, right? Their trainability doesn't go down. They're not desensitized to all these really high potency stimuli that we know about. So that's what I tell you, is that we're kind of never getting to that phase with most personal training clients, unless they've been training for, if you want it to be on the short stage, like 3, 4, 5 years, then you might be able to get into some crazier stuff where they've really got some skills, they know the exercises, and it makes sense in terms of continuing to progress. So, that's kind of the deal. Let's talk about where I might push it for both. So, for an athletic population, you may choose the top of that intensity range, or you may start to bias the heavier percentage lifts. Say if we had a range of 72 to 89%, you may bias 89% or that 85 to 89% range with an athlete that has a large external load on average in their sport. So if someone's a lineman, which is really just an easy example, and they're going to be wrestling with another 300 pounder, it's a lot of external load on average. That's a lot of, that's basically very high intensity strength work. The repetitions maybe like 3 to 5 seconds, and then they disengage. That's a reason why you might want to do that, because you're specifically preparing them for what they have to get good at, and that's generally the quality that they need to be able to display their strength, their power, their speed through that type of thing. So it's very applicable. Here we go. So like, when would I want to do something like that with a personal training population? Well, if they come in and they say, I want to be a power lifter, or I want to go into some kind of competitive strength sport, then that is your job. If it's powerlifting specifically, they really have to get good at moving the heaviest weights they possibly can. So they have to develop the force side of this thing. Well, force production then needs to become a priority, and then giving them longer time windows as they get better, giving them higher repetitions per set at higher intensities is sometimes the way to go. What allows someone to do a 90% lift, a truly 90% lift for 4 reps, is if they've gotten pretty good at moving a heavy weight slower. So you might see some pretty slow velocities, but they're still moving the weight. And some people, when they get good at that, can do it at a pretty high repetition at a high relative intensity to their 1 rep maximum. So that's kind of my thought process on that. I hope that made a lot of sense. These are all things that I think, when you're programming for clients or athletes, always have to take into account. You can look around and see people doing it all different types of ways. What I would be very emphatic about is leaving some place to go with the stress that you're implementing with your athletes. Especially if you have a young athlete and they're going to go off to college or maybe they're really special and they're going to go beyond, leaving them a little bit of room at the college level to continue to develop, and not murdering them with the highest intensity, most complex systems you've got in middle school and high school is always going to be the best way to go. With clients, same thing. Leave yourself room and time to develop. If they're not coming in the door with a wild athletic or lifting history, recovery ability is probably not there for those types of training sessions for quite a while. So any which way, that's my take. I hope it helps. If you've got questions, hit me down in the comments section. Obviously, like the video. We would like to start pumping these out, but we want to know, what people think. So anywho, let's get it.